My dad, Roger Middleton, was an artist, but not until after being a butcher for 30 years. He was born on his grandfather's farm just southwest of Vulcan. He started butchering when he was a teenager. His first job was at Symington's locker plant. Next, he went to work at Fleming's, where he was in charge of the meat department. My mother, Marjorie, came to work there, and it was love at first sight. He fell madly in love with her. They had a pretty brief romance, were married a year later, and they started a family fairly soon after, and they ended up having 7 kids. Mom and Dad built their house in Vulcan, and pretty close to the same time they built the county abattoir. Our parents had such a romance. They were amazing. They were a team in everything. The thing I loved about Dad the most, he'd just pack us up and take us to the mountains, you know? I mean, it was an old car or an old station wagon and a tent. The kids slept in the tent, they slept in the station wagon. We roughed it. But we had such adventures, you know, we had marvelous adventures. And of course, all that time he was taking those pictures that he would later use. Dad drove my mom and my sisters to have painting lessons from my Aunt Rose, and Dad would sit at the back. And finally, my Aunt Rose said, "Roger, you might as well try it." And so he did. And within weeks, he was putting everyone to shame. There was nobody who could compete with his stuff. Dad had always been a photographer, so he knew light and shadow. He understood perspective. He looked at clouds, birds, everything that nobody else noticed. He had just an automatic idea of how things should be. So it was kind of a shock to all of us when, I think it was in 1972, he was around 50. He decided that he was going to quit being a butcher and he was going to try full-time painting and try and make a living at it. Virginia Mitchell, who had a drugstore, was the first one to display his art. And then in 1974, he opened a studio and gallery in the McDermott block, which was the old theater building. And he also had showings and sales of his paintings in malls in Lethbridge, Calgary, and Edmonton. And so we would haul these things in by truck. He did have a lot of sales from that. And so in 1982, they decided to sell their house, and they bought a 5th-wheel trailer, and away they went. The object part of that was for Dad to take as many pictures of elevators because he knew they were going to be gone, and he was going to paint them, and he thought that people would buy them for their own communities. He took pictures of a lot of elevators and sketched a lot of elevators in Alberta and Saskatchewan and even Manitoba. On they went across Canada all the way to the ocean on the east coast, and then they decided that they would go to the west coast, and then they'd go to the Yukon. So the only way they could do it was to go to Arizona in the wintertime. And they hated it. And so they came back to Vulcan and decided they were going to have to find a place to live here in the wintertime. He built a paint house as well, outside, and he had windows on all 4 sides so that he could paint in there and it would be cozy and warm and not stink up the house. And he turned out a lot of pictures. I was going to say that Dad sold hundreds of paintings, but I think it probably was more like thousands of paintings. He leased paintings to the treasury branches of Alberta because they all had mountains hanging in there, and they wanted the big 6-footers and the 4-footers. So he did that. And by now he was in touch with quite a few galleries. By and large, they actually did make a living. So they did that for 10 years. He wanted to master a lot of different things. Trains, and of course clouds, which are difficult, reflections in the water. He wanted to master mountains, of course. That was one of his favorite things. And people and horses. And I think the one that he was the most proud of was, it was down in the mountainous area in the Crow's Nest when the Royal Mounted Police came up through the pass, and he actually painted all those horses and all those mounties coming up. He kept on painting pretty much to the end, but he was sick. He had cancer. Eventually he had Alzheimer's, and then his painting started to kind of go downhill. Like he just couldn't remember how to do things anymore, and so that was kind of sad, but he kept on trying. He did keep on trying. He was 75. The most important thing I remember about Dad was he just loved life. He always had a smile. He was so positive about everything.